Hello everyone, and welcome to the Health Go Live webinar series. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at OnLife. Just a few housekeeping items to go over. We would like to remind everyone that the Q&A feature will be available, so feel free to send in those questions for the panelists throughout the discussion. Stay on after the webinar and join Master Mixologist Natasha Soto-Alborz to create a bespoke holiday cocktail and mocktail duo. And with that, I will throw it over to our moderator who joins us from Avia, Eric Langshire.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Very pleased to be with you and with everyone today to help moderate this, this health panel, The Journey to Wellbeing, Consumer Trends and Engagement. So let me begin by introducing myself and sharing that this subject is, in fact, very near and dear to me. I wear multiple professional hats that touch on the general domain, and of course have some personal experience, which I'll share. My investment firm, Abundant Venture Partners, works at the intersection of healthcare and consumer media. Avia, where I serve as executive chairman, has a significant interest in this subject and a material business unit built to help providers engage their consumers. On the well-being side, I also chair the board of Mindful Magazine and mindful.org. And if you don't know it, I'd urge you to check it out. It's fantastic content. And on a personal front, I have a daughter that struggles with anxiety and depression. So we as a family think about this topic of well-being a great deal. And so much so that I wrote a book about practices to achieve well-being that Simon & Schuster published a few years ago. So I'm sort of all in and really pleased to be with you here today to dive into this conversation and moderate a discussion with our esteemed panel. Just as we jump in here, let me just reinforce. I'll be monitoring questions pretty carefully, and we'll try to pepper them in as we go. So please, if you have them, make use of the question feature, and we'll make sure that this becomes, really delivers maximum value for everyone along the way. Okay, so let's jump in, and I'll begin by introducing our panel. I'll start with Catherine Bass, who's Director of Informatics at OnLife Health, where she's responsible for data science, advanced analytics, and survey science, which clearly these are the skill sets of the day, and will be front and center, I'm sure, in this this conversation this afternoon. Catherine, tell us a little bit about your background and your role, and how you came to be doing this work.
Yeah, thank you. I loved what you said a minute ago when you said you're all in, because I feel like that kind of every day in my job. My education, I feel I'm really fortunate. I've got several universities under my belt. I just couldn't quit going to school. I loved it. And I feel really fortunate because I get to use all of that every day. I've got a degree in exercise science. I've got a background in public health. And that is just really a lot of those principles are sort of the flip side. If you think about corporate wellness, which is where I landed, and my doctorate's in health and human performance with a focus on health promotion. So, I'm one of those people who really gets to use all the different kind of aspects, and I feel all in on this as well. That all really transitioned from very, very data focused in the role that I had to taking that data and it really being transitioned into how do we use that data to really help with the consumer experience? How does that drive our product innovation? How does that drive the actual experience where the members are interacting with our app and our portal, and taking that data-driven approach so that we're not, kind of guessing what we think that they want to see. We're giving them something they want to see because we know that that's what they like based on how they've used it or what we know about them. So that's really how all that kind of transitioned in, and I'm all in on this. I love it. I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to come back to that because there's so much to unpack in what you just said, from how do we use the data to the privacy issues,
Yes.
and. So it's great to have you participate. Thank you. Nick Duan, who's Vice President of Behavioral Health at GuideWell. Nick, give us a quick sense of your background and how you came to be doing what you're doing at GuideWell.
Sure. I'm a psychiatrist and addiction medicine physician, and I've been a physician in this area for 28 years. And I've had leadership positions across the spectrum, from managed care to hospital systems to academic health centers, been a researcher, been a policy wonk, and I've been at GuideWell since June, and I'm just thrilled to be here on this panel. Thrilled to be with GuideWell because I think we're leading the country in looking at this issue. And it's just, for me, it's a pleasure just to be, in this melting pot of innovation here.
Well, thanks, Nick. We're going to try to tease out some of that knowledge and learnings along the way. And then, of course, last but not least, we've got Clint Porch, who joins us from Florida Blue, where he's responsible for strategy, solution development, and product marketing within their care and wellness digital health solution space, which I think is actually fascinating that even exists within a Blues plan. So, Clint, if you'd be kind enough to share a little bit about your background.
Yes, health plans tend to cook up lots of interesting things amongst ourselves. We're big entities, lots of resources. So we like to think and we like to innovate. So happy to be here, Clint Porch. I've been with Florida Blue, used to be called Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida when I initially joined them 19 years ago. And I know that's probably hard to believe. I look so young. I can hear you all thinking that now. Just kidding, by the way, but it's been a great company to work for. 19 years feels like really 5 years. The time has flown by. And so I've worked in a variety of capacities during those 19 years. The most recently, over the last 8 years, I've been in the care organization as part of the health promotions team, bringing some skills that I have picked up along the way, marketing, capability development, and applied that into the digital health space in our care organization. So really helping drive some of the strategy in our thinking around partnerships, helping us really look for solutions that meet our customer requirements. We have large employers that we deal with very closely. We also have consumers. There's a big consumer market that we have to care for too. What does technology look like in that space to help really enable Florida Blue's mission and Florida Blue's strategic focus on helping our members get healthy? So I help play a role in driving what some of those solutions will look like. So I've got a good view across the enterprise on what we're doing, some of the spaces that we're playing in from a technology and digital health perspective. So looking forward to the conversation and learning from all the panelists and hoping to add to the discussion with some of my learnings as well.
Great, thank you, Clint. It's great to have your voice and your perspective at the table. So let's drop in, Nick, with you. You referenced you called yourself a policy wonk. So let's begin, at a very high level here. And what we've traditionally called wellness, right, has been evolving for years. And, many in the industry prefer the term well-being, which is meant to reference a person's whole health. So let's actually begin with framing what well-being is. And so what does it mean to you?
Well, as many people know, there's no universal definition of well-being, and we can't seem to agree on this definition based on the country you're in. But at least in the United States, since probably the last 25 years, we have come to some generally agreed upon definition of well-being, and it usually includes what's your satisfaction with life, what's your internal sense of mental well-being, and then aside from that, what is your impression of the kinds of emotional social support that you have in your life? So that's sort of how the United States defines well-being. Well, that definition changes if you go across the Atlantic or if you go down south or if you go in different countries. So we are in, we're in a melting pot. The United States is a melting pot. And I think historically, we may have not considered ourselves enough of a melting pot to define that sort of construct of well-being. And so I have some ideas about how we can approach it differently, but I do think today in the US, it's satisfaction with life, it's your happiness, and it's your experience of your own energy and internal emotional state. There's about 13 questions that the CDC has come up with that's being used in most of their surveys, which is different than the WHO, which is 5 questions. And so I like the WHO version because it's more about emotional well-being rather than this broad construct in the US. And so, but I'd love to talk more about it later as we get into this conversation about the real sort of differences and the subtleties of how we can make things better in terms of defining this construct.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think has changed that we've broadened the, our concept of health and wellness to include this notion of, satisfaction with life?
Yeah, I think, I mean, when let's start 1948, the WHO said, the health is a state of complete physical, emotional, and, social well-being. It took us 50 years to say, you know what, that's right. Let's start creating measures. So that's what happens with policy. We can start with a great policy statement, but to actually actualize it, to translate it into actions, to translate into sort of behaviors takes a long time. And I think this concept of satisfaction, if you trace sort of healthcare policy back in the 90s, when I think the concept of the consumer was taking hold, we came up with satisfaction with health plans, satisfaction with doctors. And so this concept of satisfaction and judging, making an opinion about where you are, I think that's where this started, was in the 90s, this concept of satisfaction. And then sort of the world definition of it's really about what you feel inside. Are you happy? Do you have enough connection to others? I think that was layered on top of that satisfaction.
Yeah, fantastic. Catherine, let me invite you into this from your, from your perspective and your public health work and your doctorate. Tell me what you're seeing from a macro, sense here that's informed by data.
Mm-hmm. I think, echo a lot of what Dr. Dewan said. We've got these really kind of comprehensive definitions, and the practice of that, there's a little bit of discrepancy there. We're getting better at that. And as we talk, about things that are kind of coming up and things, I think the things that you just heard Dr. Dewan say about how we are actually kind of ingesting what those definitions mean, and then how we put those things into practice, from a data perspective, and this has been proved in a lot of psychological studies, what is measured is what gets done. And so when we think about a definition that is very holistic, it's the complete essence of physical health, mental health, emotional health. If we're only measuring physical health, that's what gets focused on. That's what gets to be sort of preeminent as far as what actually logistically becomes a definition. And so as we begin making more of an effort to have those metrics of emotional well-being and mental well-being, which admittedly are harder to measure. I can take my blood pressure, my blood sugar, I can measure my cholesterol levels, my weight, my height. I can measure those things, and they're relatively black and white. It is harder to measure somebody's mental health, their emotional health, satisfaction. Those are great, kind of definitions for those constructs and ways to measure that. But we have to get better and more precise at some of those things that are more subjective. And maybe precision is not the exact right way to go, but we have to have a better way to commonly measure those things, because again, what gets measured is what gets focused on and what gets done. And so if we really want to talk to consumers and interact with them in a way that is truly impactful on their life as a whole, and not just worrying about if they've got a BMI that's the normal range or a blood pressure that's not prehypertensive or hypertensive, we have to be able to focus on those things in a way that really feels like, okay, we've got some constructs here, we know how to measure them, therefore we have a baseline, targets, we can do things, we can do programming and interventions, which is what Dr. Dewan is really focusing on, is how do we have those effective interventions, then we can kind of put those in place. So from a data perspective, that's how I really think about it. I think about these things really coming into practice when we can truly measure them, and then you take action on data. That's kind of, where my mind goes on that.
Yeah, and we want to unpack that in the course of this time. If we could truly measure them, and how good a job are we doing at truly measuring them? But Clint, let's turn to you. So the title of this panel is the journey to well-being. So if this sort of conversation has just really got going, let's say in this country, since the 90s, where do you see us in the journey, and perhaps, what do you, from an aspirational perspective, what do you see as an end goal?
Well, that's a very big question. So I'll do my best to unpack it and give a good answer from a Florida Blue perspective based on kind of what we're doing now, where we see healthcare going, and what our role really is in that. I think innovation is certainly critical for Florida Blue. I think we have invested a lot of time and resources in technology, and where we see that we can help our customers and our members. And so for us, one of the big things that our focus on is this concept that enables a strategy for our member is the member journey. So basically, if you think about our life cycle with our members, you can kind of chunk it out into a few different stages. So really, if you look at pre-sale, if you look at onboarding, if you look at servicing, if you look at getting care, finding care, and getting the appropriate care, managing your care, really that journey, those different parts of the journey is central to our strategy and the ways that we want to engage with our members. So creating a very intuitive and integrative experience across that journey is our challenge. And so for us, in our relationships with our members, that's really where our focus is, over the next few years is making this journey very intuitive and very consumer centric. And one of the parts of that journey that I really want to highlight in, just because it's the place that I spend the most of my time, is in this whole get care journey. And so if you think about the health continuum from we all know who those folks are, to the chronic condition, and the health plans know who those folks are as well. So if you think about that care continuum, what sorts of interactions can we have, guided interactions can we have with our members, depending on where they are in that care spectrum. So that, leveraging data, going into Catherine's space a little bit, obviously we have to leverage data there, but our focus really is to provide solutions. Could be point solutions, could be homegrown solutions, but solutions to have a guided journey, depending on where that member is, where our customer is in their particular health journey. So that for me has been a very interesting set of work to be involved with, and just seeing how the company has evolved from really getting good at paying claims and answering phone calls to now engaging members about their health and wellness in kind of new and innovative ways.
Yeah, that's great, Clint. Thank you. Well, we're going to come back to those solutions and those point solutions, because I know we have a lot of people, participating today who are listening through the lens of, and I'm sure we're very curious to know, how do you think about what solutions rise to the top, and how you're curating that in service of your members, and driving towards, that, as you put it, well integrated and ease of use. But before we get to the future, let's just drill down a little bit into the now. And Nick, if I can turn back to you, trained as a psychiatrist, let's just let's double click on the now moment, X months into this pandemic, and general, I'd say, craziness sort of happening in households across this country. When you reflect about this year and the overall impact on our well-being as a society and as people, how do you think about it, and what are you seeing, and what opportunities, what good can come of this pain and suffering that we've been experiencing?
Well, thanks for that question. So as a psychiatrist, the way I look at what we've been experiencing is what we would consider or define as a persistent threat environment. So the world has been on a tour of duty for a year, and the world and every citizen of the world will be on a tour of duty for 18 months, when hopefully everybody gets vaccinated. We have some people that have been in what I would call a prolonged grief environment. And then you have others that have been unable to utilize what I would call the usual and customary coping mechanisms, supportive mechanisms. So this is the first time I've seen a combination of threat and despair. And those working in healthcare have really experienced that simultaneous, what I would call neurobiological, metabolic, neurohormonal insult. And that insult has been going on, and for them, it'll go on for 18 months. And recovering from that is going to take a year for some, 2 years for some. But I think the opposite side of this it's allowed people to sit back and reflect and say, what's really important to me? The other thing that it's done for leaders like us, for everybody that's listening in, for everybody in this room, is we've noticed we have serious problems with disparities. We have serious problems in terms of, I used to be a RWJ clinical disparity scholar back in the 90s, early 2000s. I thought I was doing great work. I thought I was on the cutting edge. And now this experience has taught me we're not achieving that sort of ambitious goal of making things better for everyone. So I think we have real opportunity to say, when we start measuring well-being next year, obviously well-being this year, when you look at national surveys or state surveys, it's down. More people are anxious, more people are depressed. Next year it'll be better, the year after it'll be better. But how we measure it, how we make sure we pay attention to cultural differences, this is the year to think about that. Because, although there's been suffering, there's been despair, and I really feel for people in healthcare on the front lines. I feel for the bus drivers. I feel for everybody that's sort of putting themselves in a situation every day where they're at risk. But for those that have to pick up the phone every day and say, I'm really sorry. We tried our best. We couldn't save your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your child. That's who I get concerned about for the next X number of years, because this is going to live with them forever when you're in healthcare. So I really, we're making a special effort to say, how do we help? So I'm sorry for that long answer, but, I think I had to say something about this in terms of sort of the whole psychology and neurobiology of this.
No. Listen, thank you. And thank you for taking us to the topic of disparities. And Catherine, if I can turn to you. So Dr. Dewan talked about this neurohormonal insult, which amazing term. How are we seeing this neurohormonal insult show up in different demographics? In fact, that was a question that came in from the audience.
Yeah, I jotted down that term because I loved it. I want to look a little more into it. So it is showing up. We have seen several things kind of showing up already in the data. The first things that really started kind of coming out were related to people's physical activity and also satisfaction, which interestingly, when we measure satisfaction, we ask a couple of different things. We're asking about, how are you satisfied with your program, because it's after somebody's been engaged in our program, and then we're asking them about the services and the features and how did that fit for you and was it helpful, that kind of thing. And then we also ask them what has become a very common loyalty metric. It's NPS, Net Promoter Score. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. And it's really asking, what the question is there is, how likely are you to recommend this service, product, whatever is appropriate to your friends, families, colleagues? And interestingly, we saw an absolute nosedive on NPS, which isn't really about what was happening in their life so much. It wasn't a satisfaction with, are you able to pay your bills and are you happy with your life? It was a different question, but I think it was a proxy for what was going on, because at the time this came in, it was May, if I'm remembering correctly. We were giving out the report in May for April. And so of course that was really, indicative of that time of where we were having, I think, the peak of digesting that this was a thing. It wasn't just, this passing thing that we didn't know about, that like this was going to be impactful, that we were going to be probably at home for a while. People were losing their jobs. It was when the height of, again, still not knowing what it was, and people were scared and confused. So I think it was a proxy for, even though that wasn't what we're asking about, it really showed up in that way. Also, the satisfaction, the other satisfaction we were measuring, which was about the program and services, also dipped. Didn't nosedive the way the other one did, but it definitely dipped. And we have started seeing that trend back up a little bit, not to where we were, but certainly trending back up a little bit. So I think it showed up that way for sure. And then we've also had reductions in the way people are participating. I think interesting, ironically, people are not focusing on their wellness as much. because sometimes I think wellness feels like something else I'm doing instead of something that's integrated with your life, which is something that we're always trying to work on and really help people see wellness as something they're doing every day in a way for them to be, thriving, productive, all those things. So I think ironically, even though if we were focusing on wellness, those things would help us. Exercise helps, eating the right kinds of meals and mix of fruits and vegetables and things. Those things help when we are feeling very stressed, but it kind of falls off. And then back to the physical activity I mentioned, we saw physical activity also really take a nosedive in the way the number of steps people were taking a day, which I also kind of thought was interesting because in my neighborhood, especially March, April, May, the number of people I saw outside walking was many-fold more than I'd ever seen before. I think that was people's way of kind of getting out. It was actually great to see people walking their dogs, people walking with families. So I saw that, but if you looked at people's device data, so this was actually people who have a connected device, so it's an objective measure, that was lower and it trended down. It is also starting to trend back up, but not to where they were.
Device usage trended down or was?
So they were still using their device, but the number
less.
of steps was lower. So they were still wearing it or using apps.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Gotcha.
But the number of steps they were taking and or the distance they were going was lower. So that is also trending back up, but not to where they were when you look at this time last year. It's not quite there yet. So those things are becoming obvious to us in several different ways. And I think I absolutely agree, with what Nick was saying, that this is something that, first of all, I think we're going to be in this for a bit longer. Even when the vaccines are out, I think we just have a bit longer to kind of recoup and get back on our feet. And then there are things that are just going to stay with us, whether that is losses or whether that is, with healthcare workers and things, maybe not feeling like they were able to do enough or do their job, well enough to really kind of make that difference and save somebody, in the most extreme examples.
Yeah, great. So there's a question here from the audience, which I think is fantastic, right? And it gets to this: are the solutions one size fits all? Are you able to read with your, your discerning data, your analytics, different, different inputs for different segments of our population, of our society, many of whom don't have access to the services or the fresh food that, that you're referencing. Yeah. And how do you think about, and I'm going to ask you, Clint, the same question next, how do you think about, offerings that will engage these different segments?
Yeah, I'm so glad somebody asked that because it gives me a chance to talk about it, but it also shows me that other people are thinking along this same thought process. It is absolutely not one size fits all. In fact, what I would say and what we really focus on for our own services and programs is that it's one size fits one. I think we did one size fits all for a very long time because it was kind of what we knew to do. We didn't always have this influx and not only the influx of data, but you're hiring different skill sets, and data science started being a thing, where you're really kind of focusing on that as a particular way of thinking and also a skill set and how you handle data and dive into that. So that has really taken us to the one size fits one. And as we have, we started as a wellness company, and we absolutely still have that as our core functionality. But because we are so engaged with our members and we have multiple ways for them to interact with us, and because we are representing what is important for the health plan, what is important for an employer who's offering these programs to their membership, it is super important for us to really have that consumer focus. And that's really where you're getting into things that are beyond wellness. Sometimes it's important for somebody to be connected with a food bank, especially right now when so many people have lost jobs or have gone, part-time or other, ways people are kind of modifying their work to accommodate, COVID-19 and all the implications of what have happened. And so, sometimes it's not about coaching you on meal plans and the ways to make sure you have things are balanced or a mix of fruits and vegetables so that you're getting, a variety of minerals and vitamins. It may be, hey, did you realize that you have this food service available, or you've got ride transportation that you can get to, a doctor's visit or something like that. So in that way, it is absolutely personalized. And then in some ways that maybe feel less dramatic, maybe is maybe the word I want to look for. There are also things where it may be more personalized, maybe about the wellness things. Maybe it's that you want to work on mindfulness. I heard you talking about that, and I jotted down the names of those things that you were editing for, and I'm going to look those up too, because mindfulness is such a big part of what we do every day, or what we should be doing. And I think a lot of people are incorporating that. So it could be that somebody wants to work on mindfulness, somebody wants to work on physical activity, somebody may need to find a PCP. There's a many different ways in which they need to be intervened with, and putting that in front of them in a way that's relevant for them is the way you're really going to get that engagement, but also make sure it's meaningful for them.
That's great. Well, we're going to come back to experience because it's embedded in all of that different experience. So one size fits one. It's so interesting. The first business that I built was a consumer facing site, and we learned the hard way that every time we thought we had a great idea and we were going to deliver this killer piece of functionality or feature, it wasn't.
Yeah.
So
we learned the same thing.
Yeah. Clint, tell us about how you think about curating solutions to meet, a broad segment of, of your population in a one size fits one world.
Yeah, so I think, from a health plan perspective, 20 years ago, we would have absolutely said, yes, one size fits all. You've got a PPO, you've got an HMO. So we've done a lot of shifting from the one size fits all methodology, especially of late with the explosion of health tech. If you look across the landscape, point solutions have exploded, and there's even point solutions for point solutions. So we've got, as a health plan, a very, I think, beneficial, not only role, but a beneficial view into this technology, because we see and hear from them all the time. We know what's out there. We're able to compare a lot, look and feel very similar. So we know when there is a standout, and really, our strategy for curating it has to roll up to a business need, a member need strategy. It has to do something for us. We can't just have neat techie toys to play with. That's not really part of anybody's curating strategy, especially a health plan, just because we've got broad needs for our membership base. That healthcare journey is very long, from the well to the chronic condition. So there's lots of point solutions that fit in that journey. So we're very careful, we're very cautious, and we sit in a very good position to be able to pick some solutions that we think are some of the up and comers that really would help benefit our membership.
So to the point of the healthcare journey being long, one of the questions that came in is, does well-being change with age? Do you think about segmenting your population and your audience by, age demographics?
I think segmentation is critical to any strategy when you talk about engaging with your membership, and that is also plays into a curation strategy. So some of the point solutions that we would have, Silver Sneakers is an example through one of our relationships. We do think about different segmentation, hyper segmentation of all of our membership population. So that's part of our overall strategy, and making sure that whatever solution content that's been curated is age appropriate, demographic appropriate. Now social determinants of health is a big focus for the company now, and we've actually partnered with Lyft and baked into benefit designs Lyft rides. So there's money towards Lyft rides to go to your doctor's offices. That's really addressing one of those social determinants of health. That's just one step, I think, or one of our early initiatives in our focus in that area. But yes, so hyper focused on making sure that solutions are personalized, whether it's our health products down to our health solutions. That's definitely key for us.
And are you offering different incentives for to engage these different audiences in different ways?
Yes, there's really been a big focus over the past 2 to 3 years. We view incentives in a couple of different ways, depending on the membership segments, really, our segment of our member population. But now there's been a more holistic focus on rewards, just because there's so many opportunities, behaviors that we look to our members and would like for them to do certain things. Again, talking about enrolling, onboarding, on down to managing your health. So yes, there's been we've got a lot of programs that have launched over the last couple of years in what we would call our care reward space, where we're looking at targeting members for certain certain aspects of care that they may need better help in managing, to go get a diabetic retinal exam as an example, or choose a primary care if they're not really using emergency, to the benefit level that they should. So that sort of stuff, we are definitely putting more of an effort in testing and learning incentives and really kind of help influence member behaviors in terms of managing their health and maximizing benefits.
Great. Yeah, it makes total sense. Nick, let's turn back to you. I'm also going to put you a little bit on the spot. There's a few questions that have been upvoted in the Q&A, which maybe you can answer by typing if you have a minute during the course of the next half hour or 20 something minutes. One specifically about what survey instruments to start to measure satisfaction and happiness. And also I think a question that might be right up your alley around is purpose inherent within satisfaction and happiness, which I think is interesting. But I'm going to and have a point of view on, which is yes. Let me turn to another question in terms of that was submitted by the audience here. That sort of is framed, key to measurement is valuing outcomes, right? And it's sometimes tough to put a dollar value on outcomes. And so we've got to include social, mental, physical, human, and cultural capital within well-being and wellness across populations, right? So how do you think about outcomes in this
Okay.
increasingly
Wow.
complex world?
This is you're really going to bring out the policy wonk in me. I was afraid of that. So
We're hoping for it.
The easy answer to those questions in chat, the behavioral risk factor surveillance survey includes some great questions. Okay. So that's where those questions, those are easily found and they're standard. I have some concerns about some of those questions in terms of have they gone through what I would call the co-design process with different racial groups, different ethnicities. And I think that's that should be what 2021 is about, is a focus on equity and racial sort of cultural sort of perspectives in the construction of any new surveys. Now, you talked about this outcomes. It reminds me of the WHO scale, which is a 5-item scale, which they add up to 100. You score it and you multiply by 25. That becomes what health economists called a utility survey. And when you look at whether it's cost effective analysis, most economists prefer cost utility analysis. That means if I spend $100 million, how much can I move the needle in terms of well-being? And most of these scales, the WHO scale, because it's only, a few items, there's really a ceiling effect. I mean, I'll give you an example. The WHO scale says, are you calm and relaxed for the last 2 weeks? And then they ask, I felt cheerful and good spirits, or I felt active and vigorous. I really don't know anybody that's all of the time calm and relaxed and cheerful and vigorous. It's kind of hard to do both. So some of these scales give you artificially low utility outcomes. And therefore, when you have artificially low utility outcomes, no matter how much money you spend, it's very difficult to move the needle. So I think all the researchers have to go back to the table and say, if you're going to create a quote outcomes measurement tool that allows you to do cost utility analysis, make sure that you truly have an appropriate scaling, because the ones that are created now they have real segmented cutoffs. So you can never get an accurate output in terms of investment results and X outcome. You're always chasing things. You're always being told, for those people on the call, they're in population health or public health scientists. Those of us that are making financial decisions are always going to say, can't you do more? Well, your scale doesn't allow you to do more. It doesn't allow you to create a better output. So that's my feedback on that. And so thank you for bringing the health services researcher out of me just for 10 seconds.
Well, it's a gift for all of us. Catherine, let's turn to you. There's a big energy theme here in the questions. around use of data, use of AI. Maybe I can put you on the spot a little bit and invite you to share a practical example of how you're using data in service of improving people's lives. And maybe the frame I'll offer is, there are companies like Axiom and Epsilon that have thousands and thousands of data points on us. They know where we are in this moment physically. They know what website we're on. They know we're having a Zoom call. They know what we spend our money on. But it's A, creepy, and B, it can be used in service of improving our lives. So how do you think about using that data, threading the needle, and being authentic and genuine in offering positive outcomes here, positive improvements?
Yeah, that's actually something I feel like we're doing every day is walking that balance between having a really personalized experience for somebody that feels intelligent. It also is it's an expectation. We've got on one side where we're a little bit, and sometimes more than a little bit, concerned about privacy. And on the other side of that, we have an absolute expectation because of the experiences we have with consumer leading industries like Facebook and Amazon and Pinterest and all the other. Netflix is another huge one where you have these super consumer focused, personalized interactions that becomes your bar for what you expect when you interact with anything. And so because we're also in healthcare, there's an additional layer of things that we have to consider, related to privacy, but then also that creepy factor. I actually say that all the time when I'm talking about AI is how do we walk the line of offering something that's personalized and not feel creepy? And so some of those things are happening just as our society evolves. I think we are cresting the hill of people feeling like my data is out there, and we're like, oh, my data is out there. So it's about being responsible about that, and as responsible as you care to be or want to be about what you share and how you are, your presence on social media and those kind of things. But the reality is your data is out there, and I think people are becoming more comfortable with that. For the most part. In fact, I read some research, it was a couple of years ago, that said, or that found that the more personalized a recommendation was, that was correlated with their concerns about privacy dropping. So if they had a super relevant recommendation from whatever site that they were working with, they were less concerned about the privacy of their data. And also, interestingly, they were more likely to take action on that recommendation, and they were more likely to consider that a trusted source and be likely to take action again, which of course is the gold standard of what we want. We want them to feel like this is relevant for them, and we also want them to do it and then come back and do it again. So it's a constant kind of balance. So what we are doing is making sure that we are being super thoughtful about anything that we put out there and sort of almost tiptoeing, into that.
Can you give us just an example, a concrete example where you feel like you've wrestled with where's the line and how you decided to play it?
Yeah, and in fact, social determinants of health, I think Clint mentioned that just a few minutes ago, is an excellent example. So social determinants of health data is available publicly. It's collected through the BRFSS, the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System that Nick just mentioned. It's also available through census data, and it's location specific. So if you are in a particular census tract, sometimes the granularity is only at the level of a county. So sometimes it's more granular at a census tract, less granular at a county level. It will say in this county or in this census tract, these vulnerabilities exist. It may be a food swamp, food desert. It may be a place where there's less transportation, difficulty having access to care, any number of things. And it's also things like the percentage of people who graduate high school, the percentage of people who are proficient in English. It's hundreds of variables. And so we have taken this data and have created personas using this clustering technique that finds these naturally occurring clusters within your data set. So we have these personas now, and we know, because we know where our members live by their zip code, we know which of those clusters they'll fall into and which of those vulnerabilities they may be at risk for. But where this gets a little bit touchy is that things like social determinants of health, which are super impactful on our lives, also can feel invasive, judgy if you're, as you're offering things up to somebody in our platform. So for example, I mentioned earlier, what the next right thing to do for you may be that you need to be connected with a food bank because you don't have enough food to last whatever period of time is, related to the money that's coming in. You've lost a job due to COVID-19 or some other thing. So putting a card in front of somebody in their content area to say, hey, did you realize you have this benefit? Can feel like, of course you want to do that. Tell them what they've got a benefit for. But if that person is feeling sensitive about the fact that I now have to have food bank assistance or go on Snap or whatever to have food when I haven't had to do that before, that can be a disconnect for that person and feel, again, like you're judging or feel a little bit insensitive. The other element of that comes into play specifically with social determinants of health is that because we are using that publicly available data that is specific to a geographic region, and this is an example I give because I think it's an easy one to understand. I live just a little bit north of Nashville, Tennessee. We're in Tennessee here, and we don't have a very sophisticated public transportation system, and especially if you live outside of the metro area. So my little census tract would be marked as something that has a transportation vulnerability. I have been very fortunate to have a job and to have kept that through COVID-19. I can afford to buy a car. I can put gas in it and maintenance. So it's not actually a vulnerability that affects me, although it could affect people in my neighborhood. So until you have another layer of data to add into that, which would be the member actually attesting to or against the fact that that is actually a risk for them, you're also not only running the risk of something feeling a little bit judgy or insensitive, it also could not actually be a vulnerability for that person. So we have to be very careful about what we're putting and very thoughtful about what we're putting in front of somebody and the wording that we use. In fact, we work with a behavioral economist and her team to understand, hey, if we're going to put this out here, here are the things that are important about it. Here are the things that are sort of risky related to the data we have available. What would you recommend is the way this is worded, the way this is framed, so that it doesn't feel invasive, irrelevant, whatnot.
So your advice here is we've got to be very careful.
Yes.
Would you, yes or no, would you say that the data science is in advance today of our policy and our control systems to make sure that we're using the data for good and not for bad?
Yes, to some extent, because the things that are available, the results of data science techniques may be beyond what we have still in place as policies.
Yeah.
And I think what has to happen is that we have to update our policies, but also in a thoughtful, careful way to make sure that it is in combination with the things that are available and that those things are being done for good.
That makes total sense. So Clint, in your world, is this something you're spending a lot of time in, right? Of course, the soft underbelly of this conversation is we know that, Eric Langsher ate Domino's pizza 10 times last week. We know that, we're assuming all the health risk for him. His rate should be A, not B.
Mm-hmm.
How do you all, think about that conversation and putting controls in place?
Very, very carefully, very thoughtfully. I think that the big brother is definitely a stigma that health plans have to be wary of, just because if we have anything, we have lots of data on our members, lots of data. They generate, a lot of information that they wouldn't want anybody else seeing, understanding, and having access to. So we're very sensitive to that fact. So we have to develop that level of trust with them when we do start using that data. So I think that's a place that we have to be careful with. Catherine had alluded to that, but we really have to establish that level of trust with them when we do use their data and see that it's more for good and not to be big brother and be punitive. So
what advice? I mean, that's great. There are a lot of references in some of these questions to, the health plan and maybe lack of trust. And, I think we'd all agree that that's exactly the place where, we need to go, not just health plans, but, any brand that's interfacing with consumers. what advice do you have to anybody listening who's from the payer world or really from a consumer-facing brand world around building, enduring trust in a way that, think about Amazon. It's always an easy example. We don't even price shop. We just go to Amazon. So they own us, right? They own our trust, and they translate it into great economic value for them and for others, and great consumer value. How, what advice do you have for other people listening through that lens on how to, nurture that?
Yeah, so I think at a high level, at the institutional level, it has to be critical to your mission. Folks have to understand if they're buying your product, this is what you're about. This is what you should expect in our behavior towards you as your health plan. As someone fortunate enough for you to have bought our product, this is going to be critical to our mission. How we treat you, our relationship with you has to be demonstrated, and we have to be transparent, obviously. So I think when interacting with our members, we want to demonstrate that we've got the best intentions in mind for different programs that we may offer them, ways that we engage them about their health. So I think that we have to, demonstrate that, one, we know what we're talking about, two, that we have demonstrated through this, critical focus on their health. It's central to our mission. And now here's how we, here's how we think we should interact with you now to help, foster this relationship. So I think, making it central to your mission in your relationship with your customers is absolutely critical. And then slowly gaining their trust. You want to demonstrate that you are doing good things for them. You do have, some value added offerings that the health plan could put forward in different ways that we've, not done in the past.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that thoughtful perspective. You have a job that I would imagine is kind of a fun job, right? You get to think about these big themes and then scan the world for cool stuff, and then put it in front of your members. And so what's a cool thing that you're seeing out there that's really got you fired up, that you're excited to to make available to your membership?
So there's lots of cool things. Like you said, we in our space at Florida Blue, we get to look at a lot of the cool new tech as it becomes available. So definitely one of the ones that has caught my interest, and one that is you'll hear more about it in the health plan space in general, I think, in the next couple of years, is the work that Alexa and Amazon have done to bring some of their skills to be HIPAA compliant. So there's still some work to be done, but I think that's some very interesting space from a health plan perspective for some new technology that we could leverage with our membership. So if you think about Alexa skills, you can basically train it to have an interaction with anyone about any topic and have it very meaningful and data driven. So we are taking that concept and asking what would that look like for a health plan? What skills could we teach Alexa to really help engage our members and be data driven, super segmented, and help them along that journey of our relationship with them.
I'm thinking about like, Alexa, can you please send me an EOB that makes sense?
Yes. Alexa might not be able to fix that, but
my FSA, HSA, deductible, out of pocket, copay.
It may be a long conversation, but that's kind of our thinking. We'll do our best to keep it short and sweet, but that's really the line of thinking that we're taking and kind of exploring this technology. So for me, Amazon is going to be a big player in health tech, in the next few years.
Alexa, refill my prescription. It's pretty
Yes,
amazing.
exactly.
Right. By the way, I'm sure you noticed that Amazon filed a patent now almost 18 months ago or longer, because Alexa knows whether you have a cold, because of course they're listening to you cough and sneeze when you talk.
Yes, scary to think about their data. Speaking of data.
So think about it, Catherine, the data. So today we live in a world where we shop, then they ship. But of course, where it's going is a world where ship, because they can predict our needs and anticipate before we even know we have the need. It's just amazing. Nick, by the way, Clint, thank you. That was fun, and thanks for being game to lean into this societal tension.
Sure.
Nick, I did a little sleuthing before the call, and one of the beliefs on the GuideWell site, I think, was of great interest to me, and I think it will be a great interest to the audience because of the nature of the topic here. And the belief is that consumerism can empower people to take charge of their health and healthcare. So the question to you is, is sort of like, people know that smoking isn't good for you, but people still smoke. High, double-digit percentages here of people smoke. It's amazing. Why is that? Why do we, and I put myself in this category of knowingly do things that may not be healthy? Like what is it about our species? And so here's another softball question for you. And what's the opportunity there for all of us who are listening, who are looking to engage us in a way in service of helping us achieve this life satisfaction that we were talking about at the outset of the discussion? And we've got like literally, a minute and a half, Nick. Did we lose Nick?
Okay,
Nick?
thanks for that. We do things like smoking and eating Domino's pizza because it gives us great pleasure. Now, to change us, going from a behavioral reinforcement paradigm, that I'm a real fan of a theory called self-determination theory, where you look at people's autonomy. Then you look at, if I wanted to change, and this is where AI does not work. AI only works to reward you and continually reward you. It doesn't help you change. And so to help you change, that's an autonomous decision that requires you to know how to change. And then finally, some relatedness or some reward based on that change. So change is much more difficult than behavioral reinforcement. And that's the gap. That's the gap that we have to cross with. And that's why the journey is always with the customer, with the member. And that's why you see in medicine, people getting board certified in lifestyle medicine. It's like, really, I thought that's what healthcare is about, was changing your lifestyle. But you really have to approach it from a strong theoretical basis. And we have not done that. And so I think that's the next step in our journey to help people change when you're bombarded by Domino's. And nothing against Domino's. They make gluten-free, high veggie, low cheese pizzas. So I'm not gonna downplay Domino's at all. So that's my answer. Thanks for that question, Eric.
Yeah, great discussion, everyone. Okay, let's end. We have 1 minute left. Let's do a lightning round question just for everyone. We'll start, Catherine, Clint, we'll end with you, Nick. One thing about 2021, in this topic that's really got you excited, how, something that you're going to be doing, in service of engaging consumers, in service of their own well-being. Catherine, let's start with you.
Okay, yeah. I am very excited about the trend towards holistic personalization and really thinking about that in the framework of consumerism. That has been a trend, and we've been working on this for a couple of years, and I think it's really coming to fruition, this year and then in the next few years, of things that we'll be able to provide to people. Really not only focuses on things that are relevant to them and personalized, but it does it through that lens of the things you heard us talking about today, including behavioral health, including things like social determinants of health, including things like thinking about disparities and inequities. It's not enough to gather data on something if you're not going to do something with it.
Do something with it. Great. Thank you.
That's
Clint.
right.
Clint?
So definitely one of the things that I'm excited about, just because of the space that I play in the health plan, is the focus on digital interventions. So more programming online, more digital programming content. There's going to be a much more need for that over the next year as we're kind of recuperating from the pandemic. So we're already starting to really ramp up some of our digital interventions, online content. So lots of work and effort going on there. And I think that's really going to be an interesting trend to see play out over the next year.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And Dr. Dewan?
Focusing on equity and inspiring hope as we get out of this continuous threat environment.
Here's to hope, and here's to equity as well. Thank you. Thank you all. What a fresh conversation. A genuine appreciation for your time and your thoughts, and really engaging and bringing your whole selves Wonderful discussion. Debril, I'm going to turn it back to the health team. I know you've lined up a really fun post-panel activity. And so over to you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, Eric, for moderating.
Thank you.
Thank you to Eric and to all of our panelists. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please join us on Twitter. And now, please welcome Master Mixologist Natasha Soto-Alborz.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very excited to be here with you to share a couple holiday cocktails. Again, my name is Natasha Soto-Alborz. I'm a New York-based mixologist. I have bartended at the Gramercy Park Hotel. I was most recently at Motel Morris Restaurant in Chelsea, where I designed their seasonal cocktail list. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, I found there was a big need for virtual cocktail classes. So I currently have a company called Violet and Vine of New York. And that is what I am focused on. It's been really rewarding and interesting to bring elevated cocktails into people's living rooms and teach you some of the tips and tricks that I've learned over the years as a mixologist in New York City. So I think winter is a wonderful time for cocktails. Obviously, we are heading into the thick of the holiday season, and there are a lot of great flavors that we can play with. I'm making two cocktails today. One is going to be what I call a zero-proof cocktail. So I always like to point out that mocktails don't need to be boring. They can be just as interesting as any craft cocktail. And I want to show you one of each today. The first cocktail that I'm making, I actually wanted to pull out an ingredient from the holiday table that I think gets overlooked and you wouldn't expect to find in a cocktail, which is cranberry sauce. I made my own homemade cranberry sauce for this. But I'll tell you a little secret, you could definitely use like a jellied cranberry that you would find at the store. A lot of us tend to have that in our pantry during the holidays, or we pull it out for Thanksgiving or Christmas, and there's a lot left over. It's an awesome cocktail ingredient. And what I've done is sort of a play on a spicy margarita. So people often ask me as a bartender and mixologist, how do I come up with new ideas? How am I kind of pulling these recipes out of thin air? But the trick always is that it helps to start with something that's familiar and that you know you already are sort of inclined to love. So for many people, a margarita, and especially a margarita that has like a kick to it, a little bit of heat, is a cocktail that they absolutely love. So I'm playing with those flavors. I'm using the cranberry sauce as an add-in. It adds some really great fruit and tart character to it. And a little bit of that holiday flavor, because cranberry sauce, at least when I make it at home, I tend to add nutmeg, cinnamon, allspice, clove, all of those amazing baking spice flavors. Another fun thing I'm doing with this drink, I am using Mezcal. So Mezcal being an agave-based spirit, specifically from the espadín agave plant. And most of us, if we've tried it, we know it has a little bit of smokiness to it. So I think that's really great in the winter, sort of takes our margarita more into December rather than feeling like we're in the middle of July and 90-degree weather. But wherever you are, it's going to be delicious. I've named this cocktail Out of the Office because I hope that many of you will be out of the office soon, at least for a few days. And I thought that was a really appropriate holiday title to get us going. So I'm going to show you how to build this drink. So I'm going to start with 2 ounces of Mezcal. I am using Del Maguey Vida Mezcal, which is sort of a very standard, popular one you'll find in a lot of liquor stores. So it should be fairly easy for you to source. You're going to do 2 ounces of the Mezcal right into a metal shaker. And I am playing with the classic proportions of a margarita, like I said, but I'm just switching it up a little bit with some of the ingredients. So next up, I have fresh lime juice. If you can do fresh citrus, I really recommend it. It really makes that difference between the flavor of a cocktail you get in a beautiful bar setting and bringing that into your home. So it's not too much more added time to the prep, and it makes a tremendous difference with flavor and texture for the drink. So I'm going to do 1 ounce of fresh lime juice. Now I tend to like my margaritas pretty tart and limey. If that's not for you, you can always pull back a little bit and play with what really works for your palate. Once I've done my lime, I'm going to take my cranberry sauce and I'm going to do a tablespoon of this. So again, I made this at home. It does have the texture of a regular cranberry sauce, and you'll see that we'll want to strain that out when we shake the drink. And then for heat, I am adding 3 slices of jalapeno. So I've just cut that into very simple rounds. Seeds in. Again, I like heat. If you're not so much a spicy fan, leave out the jalapeno, or you can actually remove the seeds and that will cut back on the spice factor a little bit. Those go straight into my shaker as well. Then I am using a little bit of Grand Marnier, really great orange, sort of rich cognac-y flavor. We don't need much of it. We're just doing 1/4 ounce of the Grand Marnier. Goes right in. And then my last ingredient is 3 dashes of Regan's orange bitters, sort of a classic bitter. Bitters just add like a base note to our cocktails. They give them added complexity and sort of help to round everything out really beautifully. So I'm gonna add my ice. I'm gonna shake this cocktail. I wanna shake it quite well because again, I do have the cranberry in there and that has a thicker consistency. When I start to feel my hand hurt a little bit from the cold, I know I've done a good job shaking my cocktail. So then I am doing a large ice cube in a rocks glass for this, and I am going to use a fine mesh strainer to double strain the cocktail. The reason being, again, the cranberry sauce and the jalapeno, I don't really want the pieces of that in the drink. I want to get a nice, smooth texture. So you have to have a little patience with this one. You're going to want to run it through the strainer. You can tap the side to sort of really get that liquid going through. And you just hear me tapping the side of the mesh strainer, and that's the way I'm getting all of those pieces to strain out. And that should do it for us. It's a gorgeous color. I'm going to bring it closer to the camera for you to see. I'm garnishing it with some fresh cranberries on a skewer. They are pretty tart if you bite into them. I actually really love that. If that's not for you, you don't have to do that. You could do a lime wheel or a slice of jalapeno. But you'll see here I have this gorgeous sort of red holiday color. The cranberries being the garnish over a large ice cube. Large ice cubes are fantastic because they melt more slowly and they really allow the drink to stay the way it should taste for longer. It doesn't get watered down as much. I'm just gonna taste that, make sure it's good. Delicious. The heat definitely comes through, which is really fun. Again, if you're scared of spice, you can totally leave that out. So for my next cocktail, I am doing a 0-proof cocktail called Snow Days, which I think we're all headed for some snow days if we're in the Northeast, depending on where you are, so kind of appropriate. And this, I'm actually doing some really fun flavors that I think you don't automatically think of for a mocktail. I'm using coconut milk. I'm also using cold brew coffee, and I made a cardamom simple syrup too. So overall, it's sort of a wake me up. You could have it at brunch as a mocktail, but also great in the evening if you just had a huge holiday meal and you need a little spike of energy there. So in a shaker again, I am going to do 1 ounce of my coconut milk. And that is just pure coconut milk. It has a pretty, again, thicker consistency. So we'll make sure that we're straining when we finish the cocktail. I'm going to do 1.5 ounces of cold brew coffee. Now you can buy cold brew at the grocery store. You can get it from your local coffee shop, or you can make coffee at home and chill it down. That will work as well. True cold brew tends to be a little bit stronger. So if you can source it as an actual cold brew, maybe a little better for this drink. Cardamom simple syrup. I boiled 1 cup of sugar and 1 cup of water together. I added in a tablespoon of cardamom pods and I crushed them lightly with the blade of a knife. Cardamom is an amazing sort of exotic feeling spice, and I think it's a little underused in cocktails. So I was excited to bring this one to you today. And I'm doing 3/4 ounces of cardamom. That's it, just 3 ingredients, which we love. Simplicity is sometimes our best friend. We don't need to have 18 ingredients in a cocktail. Sometimes 3 is perfect. So again, I'm gonna add my ice. And I'm going to shake this one. Awesome. And I'm actually going to do this in a copper mug. You've probably seen these for Mezcal mules. Again, just sort of a fun holiday look to it. If you prefer a rocks glass, perfectly acceptable as well. Pop my strainer in there. Goes right into my mug. Now notice I didn't double strain this one because I actually kind of like a little of the texture from the coconut. Has a little thickness that's quite nice. And then I'm going to add my fresh ice on top right into the mug. And that is our Snow Days cocktail. So again, completely zero proof. If you wanted to spike this and make it a cocktail, I would suggest maybe looking at adding rum to it. Bourbon could be great as well, but the flavor of rum is probably going to go really well with the coconut, kind of a play on coquito, which is a really common holiday drink in the Caribbean. So again, I'm Natasha Soto Alborz. I hope you enjoyed these holiday cocktails. I hope you get a chance to try them at home. You can follow me on Instagram at Violet and Vine of NY. I'm always posting recipes, tips and tricks, and you can message me and ask me for your cocktail advice that you need for this season. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Natasha, and for everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your day.